So with the advent of the NBA season approaching, well, July 31st, it's coming soon enough. The NBA is going back into, East versus West 1-8 playoff spot. But with this opportunity of a different playoff race, I've been thinking that instead of doing East versus West, so in which you have 8 teams from the East, 8 teams from the West, they battle 1-8, 2-7, etc. The NBA should do not East to West, have the playoffs based on that. Instead, just the best 16 teams in the league and have it 1-16, 2 versus 15, etc. Now, I think there are a few big reasons why this would be better. The first thing is it would be the 16 best teams in the NBA. A lot of the time with the East, right, you see like a 35, 38 win team make the playoffs just because they're in the East, while like a 48 win team in the West doesn't make it. My example is, do you remember in 2018 where the Nuggets and the T-Wolves both had 46 wins
Yeah.
last night of the NBA, and the Wizards made the playoffs in the East with 42 wins?
Mm-hmm.
It's not fair how good West teams are cut out from the playoffs just because they're from the West and they have harder games. The other one I have here written down is in 2014, the ninth seeded Phoenix Suns won 48 games. In the East, they would have been the fifth seed. And in that same year, the Timberwolves, the 10th seed, won 41 games. They would have been the eighth seed. So by having 16 teams, it allows for more competition within the playoffs by having the true 16 best teams in the league. And it also just allows for the true best teams to kind of be in the playoffs. I mean, these are the guys that have won the most games. They've earned their spot, and as such, they should be in the playoffs instead of having to sit from home and watch them. And one of my other big points is with this system, there's a lot more interesting matchups that you can do. So while in the East-West situation, like you see teams play each other just within their conferences, you see these matchups happen a lot more than diverse like conference versus conference kind of things. And because it's a playoff series, there's less travel overall, so that's not too much of a concern. So while Boston may have to play an LA team in the second round, it's better because you spend 4 nights in one town, you spend 4 nights in the other, so players are less tired, so they can still have the energy to play. But at the same time, you get a lot more interesting matchups. Like I have here written down, if we did 1-16 this season, one of the first round matchups would be Miami Heat versus Oklahoma City Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be the best playoff series in a while because those are two very evenly matched teams. Those are two teams that rely a lot on defense and team play, and I just think that's a lot more interesting than seeing the Bucks sweep the Detroit Pistons like we saw last year.
Yeah.
Just having way more competitive first rounds and more overall competition within your playoff series. And then the final thing is within the final four, there's a lot more competition. Like the 4 best teams again are in it, and in the finals it's the true 2 best teams in the league since it's been diverted from East to West. Like again in 2018, the 2 best teams in the league were the Rockets and the Warriors, and they played each other in the conference finals instead of the finals. If you ran the 1-16 system, they would have faced each other in the finals, and you would have had Cavs Rockets in the conference finals and Warriors and Celtics. And I think those would be a lot more interesting than see the Warriors sweeping the Cavs again. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, you definitely have some great points when you talk about the best 16 teams make the playoffs. But one thing is, for this season, there's 8 teams in each conference already. There's 8 teams in the East and 8 teams in the West. So as of right now, like based off how they already voted,
Yeah.
it would be 8 teams on each from each conference. It seems like it's going to be the East-West format anyway.
Yeah.
But one thing that I'm really interested in seeing this year is obviously the Clippers and Lakers is a possibility, like based off the bracket we've seen.
Yeah.
Seeing the Clippers and Lakers in the finals is a great possibility. And that would be like pretty cool to see. But when it comes down to like a whole bunch of other factors like TV viewership and like the path to the finals for certain teams, it could like be a little unfair for certain teams. Like the Lakers, they're the second best team, but they would have to go the final team that they'd most likely have to go through is the Raptors,
Yeah.
while the Bucks, who are the best team, the final, like before they make it to the finals, they have to go through the Clippers most likely.
Yep. I
So,
have it written down here where the conference finals under 1-16, the most likely matchups would be Bucks, Clippers, Lakers, Raptors, exactly what you said.
mhm. So I feel like it would be interesting to see like different things, but I feel like it should just be back to normal because since it's 8-8, and also you have to take into consideration um, for viewership, TV viewership, although it might bring more buzz at the start, it's going to end up being just like any other playoffs. It's still going to gain the same amount of attention, more or less. But with time zones being different, with between East and West teams, although the players are playing in the same location, the fans are watching from different time zones. So I feel like that, like just the logistics, it doesn't make sense.
Yep.
It would be interesting seeing like different like a change because obviously when teams go into the regular season, they kind of have a general idea on who they're going to face, and this would throw a wrench in those plans. But I feel like it would also ruin the expectation, ruin a bunch of the systems teams have to face the teams that they know they're going to face in the finals. If you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I got you. Would you like to see it implemented just for like a 1-season trial period? Maybe not this year, but just have 1 year in the future where they try the system out and just see if it works?
Yeah, I definitely would like to see it. One thing though, of course, since I'm a Raptors fan, one of the hardest things to watch was the finals when you'd have games at 10 o'clock, right?
Yep.
And those games, although as most fans, most hardcore fans would stay up and watch them, a lot of the casual fans can't watch it, especially like students who are on school nights. And it would be interesting to like see in theory, but I feel like in like if a team like the Raptors was facing a team like the Rockets or the Mavericks in the first round, um, those first round games would be held at 9 o'clock um, for Eastern time, which would be really hard to watch for the average fan. For me, it's not so much the entertainment for hardcore fans, it's more just everyone watching it.
Yeah.
Because as a fan who would watch any game, I'd love to see it, but in total, I'd rather see games at 7:30 than at
Yeah.
9.
That's a really good point, and the fact that it just has to be diverse for all fans to watch. Because you're right that, yeah, a lot of hardcore fans would stay up till 10 a.m. to watch some of these matchups. If I'm Joe Blow who got home from work at 9 o'clock, do I want to spend my time watching something I'm more familiar with or watch Miami and Oklahoma? To a more casual fan, that's not too appealing. So you're definitely right on that aspect. And the fact that the NBA, it is a marketing, it's an entertainment brand, and they want to be more diverse and incorporate everyone into their viewership. And you're right that the 1-16 might limit that or make it a bit more difficult for people from each coast to watch that. So definitely agree with that.
One thing that 1 through 16 would definitely do, though, is create more parity in the league. As if just for the sake of like argument's sake, there most likely be more Western Conference teams
Yep.
in any given year, like just based off how the league is positioned right now and how there's all stars, multiple all stars on Western Conference teams that don't even make the playoffs. But so it would give teams like good teams in the East, it would kind of expose them because they're facing solid teams all around. So it would be harder for Eastern Conference teams to make it to the finals, and you'd see you'd see more West on West action in the finals, which would be interesting to watch. But then it goes back to like as fans, even like hardcore basketball fans that are on the East Coast, it would be hard to keep up with every game there. Um, but at the same time, you said that the NBA is an entertainment industry. Let's just say that this year, instead of the Magic and the Nets making it because I believe they're under 500.
They are, and I think the two teams with the ninth and 10th seeds in the West, which I think are New Orleans and
The Blazers.
yeah, Blazers. I think they do have better records than Magic and Nets as of now.
Yeah, they
Maybe
do. They have better records. But then the guys, actually, I'm not too sure. If
also
it was 1 to 16, I think the Blazers and um, Pelicans are still under 500. I think they have better records. But let's just say, like, after this play-in tournament, right? Those two teams fall um, out of the top 16.
yeah.
Um, it would be interesting to see guys like Zion and Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball face um, LeBron or Giannis in the first round because it would just bring that extra competition. Or the
Yeah.
Blazers facing a team like the Lakers in the first round, like
As of right now, the 8 seeded Grizzlies would play the Raptors in the first round, which I think would be interesting to see if Morant could try to upset the defending champs for sure. The Nets would play the Lakers. Pretty straightforward. The Lakers would probably get the better of that one.
yeah, for sure.
The other interesting one that would carry over from 1 to 8 as well as 1 to 16 is Celtics Sixers and Clippers Mavericks. And I think both of those would be really interesting series because, first of all, with the 76ers Celtics, that's a very even series. Even though they both have gotten the better of each other at times in the past, they both are very talented teams. It's just a matter of seeing which one matches up better with the other one. I think in that series, the Celtics would have the upper hand, partially because they have a bit more depth and they're way better coached. Sorry, Brett Brown, but your systems don't really work with the Sixers. So I just feel like the Celtics would be able to get that, but it'd still be a very competitive series. And with the Clippers and the Mavericks, it'd be interesting to see how Luka could handle being defended by 3 of the best perimeter defenders in the league, as well as to see like 2 of the most bench-heavy teams in the league compete with one another in terms of how they match up. Because the Mavericks usually run a deep rotation, but the Clippers have Harrell and Lou. So it'd be interesting to see whether or not the benches factor into their overall success of each team in that matchup.
Yeah, for sure. And it would also be interesting to see the Battle of LA as a potential finals matchup. Because I feel like for a team like the Clippers, they'd have to, in order to win the championship, they'd have to go through Milwaukee and the Lakers anyway.
Yeah. As in 1 to 16, they'd have to go through Bucks and either the 76ers or the Celtics. So that would be very hard. But I think if they manage to make it to that point, that Lakers and Clippers may be one of the most viewed finals of all time. Just because they're 2 even teams, same city, just have it's been this entire storyline throughout the year, have a lot of media attention as well. So just by having those 2 teams battle it out on the biggest stage possible, I think it'd just get a lot of viewership for the NBA.
It definitely would. And also Bucks Lakers would get a ton of viewership as well. Just because Giannis versus LeBron, that storyline. And even Raptors Clippers would get a lot of attention too. Defending champs versus Kawhi. So even East-West, like those are things that could happen East-West or 1 to 16, except for the Lakers Clippers. Like all I can say is even like if anything happens, it will be an interesting playoffs to watch in total.
Yeah, I think regardless of how they format it, this is going to be possibly the most open year of playoff basketball in a long time, because while there are 3 teams in the Lakers, Clippers, and Bucks who are kind of ahead of everyone else, it's unclear how the quarantine has impacted their dynamics. Are their players getting in the gym? Are they still in shape? How are they doing? Meanwhile, we see photos of James Harden and Nikola Jokic in quarantine, and all of a sudden, the guys who are usually pretty chubby have lost 30 pounds. Are they coming back like in peak shape? Are they coming back ready to win? have they been affected at all? So it's just going to be
Yeah.
interesting to see how like this massive quarantine has affected these teams and whether or not they can rebound from it well enough to compete for a title.
Hmm. And even for those players, like you said, James Harden and Jokic, who were chubbier and slimmed down, it will also be interesting to see who is like how that affects them, because who knows, maybe it does make Jokic way better or James Harden worse.
Yeah,
It because one thing for Harden, his game, although it's not really like relied on athleticism, it's more like handles and dribbling the ball and dribble, 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 step back. Who knows? Maybe this new look Harden could either be the reason why the Rockets make a deep playoff run, or he could be the reason why the Rockets he could get injured for all we know,
yeah,
um, and he could be the reason why the Rockets fail.
yeah.
So it'll be
And
interesting to see that.
the other thing is part of Jokic's skill set is the fact that he's big enough that a lot of guys get pushed around by him. Will his new physique impact that at all? Will he still be able to? Will he have the same kind of dynamic on the court with the guys he has? Or
Hmm.
will it allow him to move around the court faster, maybe be a better defensive presence? That's been some of his shortcomings throughout his career. So it's going to be really interesting to see just how this quarantine has affected all NBA players and whether or not it directly affects their title chances.
Yeah. And it would also be interesting for teams like the Bucks and Raptors who had players that were kind of overachieving or having great seasons. It'll be interesting to see how this break affects them, whether they'll have like go in the same stride or if they're just gonna regress. Like there's been players on the Bucks like George Hill, um, Dante DiVincenzo. They've had step up in improvements. And then there's guys on the Raptors like Van Vliet, Terrence Davis, Norman Powell, who have been having great seasons, especially great shooting seasons. Who knows what's going to happen to those players
Yep.
Once we come back?
I think that's one thing that a lot of fans and people around the NBA are kind of ignoring right now. The first month or so of basketball, it's going to be really rough to watch because all these guys haven't really been around a court for the last 3 months. So their shooting is going to be bad. They're going to be pretty slow, and a lot of the time, like the 8 regular season games, while they do have significance in terms of the lower seeding, who's going to get in, it's going to be more of a warm-up phase for those good teams because they're for the teams like the Raptors and the Bucks and the Lakers who have already clinched playoff spots. For them, it's just a matter of getting your shots up, getting back in rhythm, and trying to get into the season. So those first 10 games, fans should expect a lot of missed shots and a lot of just sloppy basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing that a lot of people are forgetting, that people have been on vacation for a while. So just expect them to not be at their best right away.
Mm-hmm. And you also have to take into account the teams like the Clippers, who have been dealing with injuries primarily to their stars in Paul George and Kawhi. This
Yep.
break might be really good for them as it's like a time to kind of have a little bit of rest and heal up, especially like for the Sixers is another team with Joel Embiid, who's always been dealing with injury problems, and Ben Simmons, who people didn't even know if he'd be like ready come playoff time. Those are factors that we can see in the playoffs that we could just watch and see how they play out.
Yeah. But like we've been saying, the quarantine has really changed the dynamic. And for the first time, it's just more open than what we've seen in previous years. It's not
Mm-hmm.
so top heavy anymore, which is honestly, it's good because I find that when you enter the playoffs expecting one of two teams to win the title and no one else has a shot, it can get a little boring at times. But
Mm-hmm.
now the fact that 10 or so teams have a legitimate shot at a title, it's a lot more interesting as a fan to watch, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And if they do East West, which it does seem like it's going to be like, I've read the rules. If the top 7 seeds on each side are safe, and then it's just the 8 and 9 that 8, 9, 10, depending on what conference, that are kind of battling out for that final spot. And let's say Memphis does get kicked out of the playoffs, which it kind of looks like that's what that league was trying to do, because the threshold for the tournament was a 4-game difference, which is a pretty big difference, especially in those tight playoff races like the Pelicans and Grizzlies race and the Portland Trailblazers race for the playoffs. It'll be interesting to see Pelicans versus Lakers or Trailblazers versus Lakers. And who knows, there might be an upset. Although it's unlikely, you never know, especially with the Pelicans, because a bunch of those guys played against the Lakers, and they definitely have something to prove.
Yeah. And the other thing is Portland, you were talking about guys coming back from injury. They're getting Yusuf Nurkic back from injury. And it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to play him alongside Hassan Whiteside. Because arguably you can make the case that Whiteside's stats are certainly better than Nurk's, but Nurk has more of an impact on the court. So it'll be interesting to see if they choose to play two traditional centers next to each other, or how they evenly distribute their minutes alongside each other.
Yeah, especially going back to the Lakers matchup, that two centers might be the move for the Blazers, because obviously Hassan Whiteside has had problems in previous playoff series where they just put a stretch big at the 5 and exposed him. But the Lakers, they usually run a lineup with AD and Dwight or AD and JaVale McGee, and having a player like Whiteside who has solid rim protection, who could guard AD, or not guard, but he could at least contain AD. And then you have Nurk, who knows, anything could happen. Anything could happen.
And I think a big part of that potential matchup is, while Davis is certainly an above-average shooter for a center, and he certainly likes to shoot threes, he's not a league-average shooter by any means. His career shooting from three is lower than league average, and this season it's reflecting that too. So having Nurkic and Whiteside, if they try to get Davis to shoot a lot of threes instead of coming into the paint, that could backfire against the Lakers. Because if they have Davis shooting 7 or 8 threes a game, but only making 1.5 to 2 of them, it could give Portland an upper hand in terms of a rebounding advantage and potentially more chances to score, and allowing Damon McCollum especially to get going on offense.
Yeah, and especially having two bigs, it just congests the paint for the Lakers. And LeBron, who is below average shooter, like career-wise, everywhere instead of the paint. The paint is where LeBron shoots the majority of his shots and also makes the majority of his shots. He shoots about 70% from shots between 0 to 3 feet. So it'll be interesting to see how LeBron reacts to that, whether he's going to take a step back scoring-wise and be more of a facilitator, which he's like proven to be, or just a regular LeBron, just dominating, scoring a bunch of points. Who knows?
Because we saw it on opening night against the Clippers, where opening night the Clippers just said, your team, the Lakers, aren't a great shooting team, especially when they run the Davis, LeBron, Dwight Howard, or JaVale McGee lineup. So we're just going to put all our defense in the paint and let Rajon Rondo or Anthony Davis or Avery Bradley shoot threes, because we know you're not the best at that. So it'll be interesting to see if that carries over into the playoffs, where teams, when they face the Lakers, will they decide to pack the paint and just let the Lakers shoot it, or will they just play them as they would normally?
Mm-hmm. And it will also be interesting to see teams like the Rockets go against the Lakers, where it could be a completely different Lakers team that they put out on the court, especially like the way that the Rockets, their center is 6'5". So, and if they're running a 5-out offense, there's no need to put Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard or Anthony Davis and JaVale McGee.
I think if the Lakers face the Rockets at any point, I think that'll force them into running the Davis at the 5 lineup, because they've been very hesitant to do it. I think a part of that accounts for the fact that Davis is usually a very injury-prone player, and playing against bigger 5s usually kind of brings that out and makes him more susceptible to injury. But if they put him against the 5 against the Rockets, he won't really have to worry about that. So I think if they face the Rockets, it'll force them into adapting by putting Davis at the 5 and potentially LeBron at the 4. And it'll be interesting to see how prepared they are for that, because they didn't really run that lineup throughout the season. So it'll be interesting to see if that lineup has good chemistry with one another, or if they're a little out of sorts because they're not used to playing that style.
Yeah, and it like obviously basketball is all about adapting. And it would be interesting seeing the defensive schemes that the Lakers use to contain the Rockets' constant barrage of threes. Because as you've said multiple times, like outside of the podcast, the Rockets can, if they're on, they're just gonna light it up. They have multiple guys that can just spray threes down the Lakers' mouths. But if they're off, then that's a whole nother conversation, because then defensively, the Rockets can't stop LeBron, can't stop AD. So it's kind of going to be a shootout. Who's going to be better offensively? It won't even be a defensive matchup at that point.
And we've seen Anthony Davis play against shoot-first guards in the past, especially that Portland Trailblazers series from 2018, where him and Drew Holiday were able to completely wreck Damian Lillard because they continued to double him, and Davis's ability to guard the perimeter prevented Dame from being able to get into the lane a lot and get the threes that he's so used to taking. So it'll be interesting to see if they run those same kind of tactics against James Harden or potentially Russell Westbrook, because Westbrook's inability to shoot might be exposed by a player like Davis, where because of the Rockets' lack of height, you could theoretically match up Davis with Westbrook and could sag off and let Westbrook shoot it. And if Westbrook goes into the paint, he could easily guard him there and contest his shots. So while it's probably not going to happen, it'd be interesting to see that unfold, because would Westbrook's speed get the better hand of Davis's lack of it, or will Davis's length and size be able to contain Westbrook in paint and force him into shooting the shots that have gotten him low levels of playoff success in the past?
Or what the Rockets could do is they could run a modified zone where they have a guy on Harden and some of their shooters. You could sag off Tucker, and then you could force Westbrook to drive and face a double team with whoever's guarding Westbrook and Davis.
Yeah. And the other thing is about the Rockets is, like we've said, when they're on, they're on. When they're off, they're off. Now more than ever, they're a very inconsistent shooting team. Like, Robert Covington is one of my favorite players in the NBA, but he goes through streaks of very hot versus very cold. So if he's off for that series, do you just take whoever is guarding him on defense and put him on James Harden potentially and force Harden into turnovers? Or if he, on the contrary, if he's on, do you let James Harden just ISO the whole game and see if he can choke as he usually does and see if that can get you the win?
Yeah, who knows? All of that's like theoretical, and the Lakers like defensively, as much as we like talking about like what they're going to do against the Rockets, another question is what's the Rockets going to do against the Lakers? Like, who's going to stop two guys that are more athletic than anyone on that team?
Yeah.
And
the Rockets, they have good matchups in theory. Like, Tucker is a good post defender on Davis, but he's not nearly big enough to contain him for a whole game. He's had okay success in the past, but those are on a few shot attempts here, a few shot attempts there. Can he guard Anthony Davis for 40 minutes? Probably not. And then Covington is he's a good defender. He's a good matchup kind of on LeBron, but Covington is more of a help side defender than a one-on-one defender. So him guarding LeBron and LeBron having a large strength advantage on Covington may be able to expose him getting to the rim and hitting potential post shots over Covington too. So it'll be interesting to see if the Rockets choose to sag off bad shooters or their centers and see if they can double LeBron or Davis as well.
Yeah. And another thing for the Rockets, they have a bunch of players, especially this season, that were kind of surprises, like Ben McLemore. And I don't know how to pronounce his name, but his last name's House, Dinuel house. They were two solid shooters. Who knows how they're going to come back from quarantine?
Yeah, especially with guys like them where they are the epitome of the Rockets' three-year key. McLemore, I think, on his 500 or so shot attempts this season, didn't take a single mid-range. It'll be, like you said, it'll be interesting to see if they can regain their shooting forms ahead of a potential playoff matchup. Because if they can't, then the Rockets are losing some of their better players in their wing rotation, and some of the key reasons why Harden and Westbrook driving the lane has been so successful for them.
Mm-hmm.
So they really kind of need those guys to be on, and if they're not, then the Lakers can definitely take advantage of the fact that they're not, because neither of those two are great defenders. So having them off on the offensive end and being what they are on defense, it really allows for matchup advantages in favor of the Lakers.
Max, I have a question for you. Do you think that this quarantine break is going to help teams like the Clippers and the Bucks who have super athletic players to like, do you think that gives them the advantage? And even the Lakers, who's like the majority of their team are athletes that can score in the paint instead of shooters.
I think it gives advantages to those teams. I think it does give somewhat of an advantage. I don't think it's really world breaking where teams that are smart teams and good teams that rely on a lot of threes, they're still going to be good teams. Like they're not just going to fall off the face of the planet. But at the same time, like the three teams you mentioned, they're going to be fine because their best players, like LeBron and Kawhi, they have a good ability to be able to play anywhere on the court and score from anywhere on the court. I think the Bucks will have issues because outside of Giannis, a lot of their team is reliant on three-point shooting. So they might have some struggles coming out the gate. Lakers don't really rely on shooting that much, so I think they're in a good spot, as well as the Clippers, because a lot of their Clippers, like Kawhi can score from anywhere, Paul George can score from anywhere, Lou Will can get to the rim, Harrell is a player who primarily scores around the rim and can't really do anything else. So I think you have a good point where those teams are better off than teams, say, like James Harden's Rockets or the Blazers that rely on guard play and outside scoring. But at the same time, I think outside of the first 8 games and once it hits the playoffs, I think that negative balance of shooting and scoring will kind of be offset a bit.
I agree. Anyway, should we switch topics to the 6 main regular season awards?
I think we shall.
So let's start off with the MVP. Who do you have?
Well, I think we both have the Greek freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and I have a few notes. He's the best player on the best team in the league. I think usually that just should be the MVP regardless. Just they have the best record in the league. I think they are, in terms of winning percentage for a single season, they are in the top 10 of teams of all time, right alongside the Warriors and the 90s Bulls. His plus minus is an unreal 16.4 per 100 possessions, which is amongst the top in the league. He is the best box plus minus in the league. He has the best PR in the league. Win shares, he has the best, as well as defensive plus minus in the league, which is a topic we'll get to in a minute. And also in terms of box plus minus for a single season, he's the 9th best in NBA history. The 8 ahead of him include 2 of Jordan's MVP seasons, 2 of LeBron's MVP seasons, Curry's unanimous MVP. All 8 ahead of him won MVP in that respective year. So it'd be kind of weird to see Giannis have this amazing plus minus season where his team is amazing, he's statistically amazing, and he doesn't win MVP. And the other thing is just his stats. I mean, 30 plus points, 13 plus rebounds, 5.5 assists, a steal, a block. And it's carried over onto the court where his personal gains as a player throughout his career have translated into the Bucks becoming a better overall team throughout the years. And like I said, just being the best player on the best team in the world, it really goes a long way in solidifying his MVP claim.
Yeah, I have Giannis as well. You talked about PER, you briefly mentioned it, before that little losing skid where they lost to the Lakers and a couple other teams, Giannis was on pace to have the best PER in a single season of all time. So that's better than Wilt's season where he scored 50 and grabbed like 25 boards. That's better than Jordan's best season when it comes to PER. And although it's not a perfect stat, like it gives an indication on how like efficient a player is and how good a player is that season. And then you also touched upon his numbers. I have his exact numbers: 29.6 points, 13.7 rebounds, and 5.8 assists. Just insane. And he's doing this all on 31 minutes a game.
I think that's the biggest thing, where his competition for MVP, which is mostly just LeBron, he's playing upwards of 35 minutes a game. Giannis is doing it in not that much time. And
31.
he's not even playing that much. I think Dennis Schroeder is playing more minutes than Giannis is this season, which is ridiculous to think about, how he's almost averaging a point a minute, and he's putting up all these numbers, and he's leading to team success, all while only playing 31 minutes a game.
Mm-hmm. And then also the amount of, speaking of Dennis Schroeder, actually, never mind. Also, like, he only takes 20 shots a game and is scoring like 30 points. So his field goal percentage, super high, about 55%. His three-point shooting is below average, and free throw shooting. But those are things that, like, Giannis, this season he got to the line a lot, 10 attempts per game. But the three-point shooting, that's something that he's like trying to get better, but it's not necessarily like a reason why he shouldn't win MVP, because that's not his game. His game's mostly based off running and dunking, which
for all the people that think that three-point shooting is like a metric of how good a player is, it's not if you're really good at everything else like Giannis is. He plays in a system where he's surrounded by at least 4 shooters. Pretty much every other player on the court for the Bucks is a shooter at all times. He never needs to shoot it. So what he needs to do is exactly what he's doing, which is get in the paint, dunk on whoever is guarding you at all times, and still be a dominant force on the defensive end and make plays for others as well, which is a role he's embraced completely. And right now, he's having the best season of all NBA players currently. So, and as such, he should be MVP.
Mm-hmm. And another thing we haven't mentioned, which we'll talk more in depth later, is his defensive game. He's arguably one of the best defenders in the league right now. And
Easily.
On defense, he is a matchup nightmare because of his length and speed. He could guard almost every position just off his length and his speed. And we'll talk about that later when we come to the Defensive Player of the Year.
Yep.
But honestly, I don't even think it's a conversation on who should win MVP. Like, a lot of people talk about LeBron, and yeah, LeBron's having a great year, averaging about 26, I believe, and 10.
Yeah, he's having an amazing season. But the thing is, he's had a great season, but he's had only about the month of March and February was he like in the real conversation as he might overtake Giannis. Giannis from the start of the season in October all the way to March was like, he's playing at an elite level. He's leading his team in pretty much every category. He's the best player on the planet. Mm-hmm. So as such, he should definitely be MVP.
Yeah. And another thing is for LeBron, a lot of people, obviously these awards are also based off narrative. Like, oh, because I guess you could spin it for LeBron, oh, he took a team that didn't make the playoffs to a team that's number 1 in the West. And I guess voters might be like interested in that and intrigued and inclined to vote him also because of his age. But when we're looking at the MVP, the most valuable player, which essentially means the most, like the best player, the best regular season player that year, it's Giannis. I don't think it's even a debate. Both sides of the court, he is dominating in, and there's no team can stop him. The only team that was able to stop him last year, which he had a crazy year last year, that's why he won, was the Raptors in the playoffs. And that's because they have some of the best defenders in the league. They had
Yeah.
arguably one of the greatest defenders of all time guarding him.
Yeah. The thing about Giannis is Kawhi guarded him last year, but outside of Kawhi, there really isn't an NBA player that can guard him for at least a playoff series. Because when you think about like dominant centers like Gobert or Joel Embiid, they're too slow to keep up with him on the fast break, and they're prone to fouling. So, and he can just go over top of them. He's tall enough to be able to shoot over them. And with smaller guys who are good defenders, it's easy for him because he's so big and strong.
Mm-hmm.
He's a matchup nightmare where, like we've been saying, only Kawhi can really guard him. And as such, he's just been a dominant force for the last 2 years.
Yeah. And I think another reason why people are hesitant to pick Giannis and are more inclined to pick LeBron over him is just because this whole narrative that's going around that Giannis has a deeper team. I'm going to put that in quotation marks because I feel like some people forget to mention that they have an arguably a top 5, in my opinion, the 6th best player in the league in Anthony Davis,
Yep.
And they have solid role players too. It's not like they have scrubs. I mean, they have Kuzma, who this season, when it comes to three-point shooting, he's left a lot to be desired. They have Contavious Caldwell-Pope, who was a meme at the start of the season, but he's shooting almost 40% from three, and he's averaging like 13 points per game. I don't see how you can dismiss those players. And then they have Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, 2 solid centers, Danny Green. I mean, obviously, it's if you compare like the top threes or like the other 2 players, I mean, Bledsoe and Kuzma as third options, Bledsoe is obviously the better third option. But when you're talking about second option, you must be on drugs if you think Chris Middleton is better than Anthony Davis. It makes no sense.
I think part of the supporting casting is both players have very different supporting casts, but they're both good. Like the Lakers bench and the Lakers other starting 5s, they're not bad players. They're all good veterans who know their role and they do it to pretty much as good as they can. Same goes for the Bucks. So I think part of the MVP is it's an individual award. So you can't really say, oh, LeBron has a worse team than Giannis, because at the end of the day, the MVP it really should go to just the best player on the best team in basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And while you could say Giannis's overall supporting cast is better, it's really not better to the point where you can justify giving it to LeBron over Giannis just because of that fact.
Yeah, and you also can't make hypothetical situations as well. Like, oh, LeBron has AD who demands a lot of touches, because what's problematic in that is if LeBron doesn't have AD, the Lakers probably aren't a top 2 seed. And historically, the MVP has been given to the best player in the top 2 seeds in each conference. The only players in recent memory that have won the MVP but weren't in the top 2 seed was Westbrook after having that historic year, and Michael Jordan back when he was a 3rd seed. So it's not that common to give it to players that aren't up there. I mean, I'm just going to switch topics a little bit. A lot of people talk about Steve Nash's MVP, and a lot of people say how Kobe should have won MVP one of those years. I'm pretty sure the Lakers were the 6th seed one of those years. And Kobe wasn't even top 10 or top 5 in MVP voting.
One of those years, I don't even think Kobe made the playoffs. So you can't justify giving it to a player who's a lower seed, especially like a 6 or 7 seed, compared to a guy at the top seed. And even with like the Bucks versus the Lakers this year, the Bucks have a higher net rating. The Bucks have a higher plus minus. The Bucks are just a more overall dominant team than the Lakers are. And you can't really say that LeBron's carried them to that because he does have good players around him as well as Giannis does.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So if we're looking at individual players from basic stats to advanced stats, minus assists, Giannis is better than LeBron in every category, or most categories. minus like 3-point shooting and free throw shooting. But it's not like LeBron's that much better of a free throw shooter than Giannis. Not that it matters. And I think another reason why LeBron is being seen as a potential MVP candidate is obviously like, he's one of the best players in the world right now. And since he's leading the league in assists and is most likely going to be the assist champ this year, people are saying, oh, look, he can score and assist. But assists don't necessarily mean that you're the best playmaker just because you average the most assists. Because I believe LeBron averages close to 5 turnovers a game as well, which is obvious. You're passing the ball more, you have the ball in your hands more, you're going to turn it over more. But I think LeBron just does his job, great player. But I think this season Giannis has had a better year in general when it comes to scoring, efficiency, rebounding, and overall winning.
Yep. Speaking of Giannis, shall we move on to our next award, Defensive Player of the Year?
Yes.
And speaking of, like I said, we both have picked Giannis.
Mhm.
And some stats I have. He leads the league in defensive win shares and defensive plus minus in terms of advanced stats. His counting stats of 13.5 rebounds, about a steal, and about a block, the rebounds stand out, but the defensive numbers don't. It doesn't really matter because his field goal percentage in terms of defense at the rim, opponents shoot 49% at the rim with him guarding them. That's about 11% worse than league average, which I believe it's either him or Brook Lopez, which that's the highest in the league. And also, the Bucks have the best defense in the league, and he's the best defender on the best defense. And as such, it should go to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my points are very similar. He also leads the league in defensive rating out of all the players who get relevant minutes. So my criteria for that is you have to play at least 10 minutes a game and play 30 games this season. And he leads the league in defensive rating, which is great. And like you said, defensive win shares, he leads the league in. He's also a nightmare on defense with his length and speed. Super versatile defender. And honestly, when you see Giannis guarding a player, like you can tell that player, whether a star player or not, is going to struggle against him. The one thing that one other player that could win Defensive Player of the Year is Anthony Davis. And this is an interesting debate, Giannis versus Anthony Davis, because although Giannis's opponents shoot about 45% in total out of all shots, like you just mentioned, 49% in the rim. Giannis only faces about 11 field goals against, while Anthony Davis allows about 47% of his opponents to shoot. Like that's their percentage. But there's about his opponents take about 14 shots per game. And that can be reduced to the fact that Anthony Davis is a interior defender and, players are going into the rim a lot, while Giannis is kind of on all spectrum, like all sides of the court. And also people are afraid to like take shots over Giannis, where Anthony Davis, a shot against could be just a contested shot at the rim. Yeah. So I definitely think Giannis should win it. And you also touched on the fact that defensive stats, also known as blocks and assists, they don't necessarily mean anything when it comes to being a good defender. Because last time I checked, Andre Drummond averages about 2 steals and 2 blocks per game. But he is never going to be in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year or even all defense. Yeah. So I think if you watch the games and if the voters actually know what like defense is, then it will definitely go to Giannis.
Yeah, I think Anthony Davis is definitely number 2. And I think throughout his whole career, he's kind of been ignored as a really good defender because A, of his offensive output, and B, just because he's in New Orleans and no one ever really sees him. But he is himself a very good defender. And it's closer in this one than it is for LeBron versus Giannis in MVP. But at the same time, Giannis, his advanced stats show he's better. and he is the best defensive player on the best defensive team in the league, and that just gives him the upper hand because he helps lead a team defense as well. And I know the Lakers are second in defensive rating, but they're not first. So
Yeah, exactly. Or are they second? I think the Raptors are ahead
Sean,
of them.
Sean,
Um, I'm checking right now. Don't worry about it. I have the tab opened up. It's just loading. Um, we could get back to that later. But yeah, defensive rating. The Raptors are second.
Lakers are third.
Third. Yeah. And even the Raptors, I know this is a conversation of defensive player of the year, but the Raptors and Bucks are kind of 1 and 2 when it comes to defensive teams, which is just a testament to Nick Nurse and his defensive system. Anyway, should we go on to the next award, which is Sixth Man of the Year?
Yes.
Who do you have?
I have Dennis Schroeder from Oklahoma City Thunder. And my reasoning is it's really between him, Lou Will, and Montrezl Harrell. Schroeder averages the most points of the group. He moves the ball similarly to Lou. Lou averages a bit more assists, but they're not too far off. He's the most efficient. He's an efficient shooting guard. He shoots 46 from the field, which is pretty good for a smaller point guard. And he also shoots 38 from three, which is a pretty good clip considering he takes about 4 a game. He is part of the best lineup in basketball in terms of net rating per 100 possessions, which is him alongside CP3, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Gallinari, and Adams. They have a plus 30 net rating per 100 possessions, and I use the criteria for lineups that have played more than 100 minutes alongside each other. And part of the reason that OKC has been a surprise team this year, and the fact that they are, I think they are fifth in the West or fourth in the West. Part of their success has been based off the fact that he comes in and he torches opposing guards. Even though OKC's bench outside of him is limited to kind of one-way guys like Nerlens Noel and Terrence Ferguson, he's been able to elevate their entire bench unit to a league average clip. And he's been hyper efficient. And in the times where he's been given starter minutes, as we said, he averages more than Giannis. He's been given starter minutes and he's produced at an extremely high level. And he's made OKC's bench and OKC as a team a lot better because of his contributions.
Mm-hmm. So for me, I had a different approach to this award. When I hear sixth man, I hear a guy that can come off the bench, provide instant offense, provide energy for the team. And I know energy, it's such a subjective term. There's nothing you can really there's no stat that can produce it. But when I think of a guy like that, the perfect sixth man doesn't demand too many shots per game, and can still score at a high level. I think of Montrezl Harrell because he's low maintenance. He's a pretty good defender. He's super athletic, averages 18.6 points per game, which is 0.4 less than Schroeder, on 13 shots per game, which is about 1 less shot per game. Obviously, they're two completely different players when it comes to game style. And since he's a forward, like a power forward / center, a bunch of his shots are going to be inside the paint. So field goal percentage isn't really the best stat to compare them. But when I just think of a guy that could come off the bench and just score and then could sit out, but could also run with the starters, and the starters could get their shots up too, I think of Harrell. I also think Dennis, he's a great option, and he could win it as well. I don't think Lou could win it just because of voter fatigue and the fact that he has another teammate who's producing nearly the same amount of numbers.
Yeah.
But instead of assists, it's rebounds. One thing that's interesting about Schroeder, though, is there's 3 guys on OKC that average about the same amount of points, which is Gallinari, Shai, and Schroeder. They all average about 19-point-something points per game. And Dennis shoots the most shots out of all of them. So if you're talking about sixth man as the best sixth man and the sixth man that has the biggest impact on their team, then I definitely say Dennis Schroeder.
Yeah,
Just because he takes the most shots and
yeah,
he plays more minutes. He plays like I think he's like the third has the third most minutes on the team.
yeah.
Um, but when you're talking about a six man that does the job of a six man to come off the bench, relieve the starters, and keep them afloat, then I think Montrezl Harrell is the guy.
Yeah, I think both of them are really good candidates, and Lou too, because both of them, when they enter the game, they change the dynamic of the court and the way it's played. Both of them do give energy, and both of them kind of change the dynamic of the team where they can give you instant offense. Harrell will give you some rebounding and some interior presence on defense, and Schroeder can give you playmaking and a decent, not amazing, but decent perimeter defense as well. So just by having both of these guys come into the game, it can change what OKC and the Clippers, what they can do on the court. And because of that, they're both ideal candidates for the award.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Schroeder, as we've talked about in the past, about how there's like every team has a great point guard, right? So there's, I feel like now that the point guard position, there's more and more players that can really score from that position. I feel like as the years go on, we're gonna see more players like Schroeder who were starters. Like back when he was in Atlanta, he was a starter. Um, like he for some time, before Jeff Teague left. He was backing up Jeff Teague, but for the most part, he was a starter. There's going to be players like that, especially the younger players, that are going to have a hard time to become a starting point guard on a good team. And there's going to be more players that are going to be coming off the bench, like a Colin Sexton or Darius Garland, to
I've been
succeed in that role.
I've been thinking about this, and your point on it's the golden age of point guards. And the more and more guards that are going to be drafted, there's going to be a lot of, well, like you said with the Cavs, where you're going to have two shorter point guards starting next to each other just because they're both extremely talented and there's just nowhere else for them to play. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot more like Frankenstein almost lineups where we're going to have point guards at small forward, like what OKC is doing in their Shea, CP3, Schroeder lineup, or point guard at like smaller point guards at the shooting guard lineup, just out of necessity because they can't play anywhere else. So I think it's going to be interesting moving forward to see just how many talented point guards are either going to start at different positions or come off the bench just because of the sheer talent from that position going forward in the league.
Yeah, I definitely agree. This is definitely a golden age for point guards.
Yep. We were having our discussion about like potential places, like teams that could use point guards. We only really came up with three just because there are so many good point guards in the league right now where your 18th best point guard in the NBA, they're probably an above average player right now, which is it's incredible to think about just how diverse and talented the position is currently in the NBA.
Yeah. And speaking of point guards, one point guard that could potentially win another award is Ja Morant, who's in contention for Rookie of the Year. Who do you think should win Rookie of the Year, and who do you think other players are that like have a shot or should get some looks?
Well, I think Morant is. It looks like he's going to be unanimous. He's an incredibly talented player. He passes both advanced in terms of he's the leading scorer and leading assist getter amongst all rookies, and he passes the eye test. I mean, I've watched 2 or 3 games from him this season, and it's just incredibly fun. It's clear that he's got both attitude and a lot of talent, and he can back it up with his play. His court vision for a rookie is extremely advanced. He knows when cutters are moving, when shooters are open, and he can find, especially Jaren Jackson and Brandon Clark, a lot of open looks. And it's just clear that he's been able to produce this throughout the entirety of the season. And you know me, I like Derrick Rose, and I see a lot of that slashing point guard in him. So I've got a lot of hope for him in the future. But outside of him, I think the other two candidates are Kendrick Nunn of Miami and Zion of, obviously, of New Orleans. But I think Morant gets it, especially over Zion, because it's similar to when in 2017, Joel Embiid was clearly the best rookie player in his draft class, but he only played a few games compared to Brogdon, who did it over the course of a season. And I think that factors in because, yes, Zion has been amazing. Yes, he's probably going to be an all-star very soon. And he's clearly already dominant even at his young age. But he hasn't done it throughout the entirety of the season like Morant has. And as such, Morant should win the award. And he's been really good for Miami. He's a key reason why they've been a good team. But he just doesn't have the talent that Morant or Zion Williamson has.
Yeah, I have Ja as well. I think as a guy, just a overall player, like the work ethic, the athleticism, and the basketball IQ. I think as a point guard, those three things are definitely things you want your point guard to have. His shooting could be better. He doesn't shoot too much. He shoots about 2 shots per game, 2 point something shots per game. But just like that goes back to work ethic. Obviously, he went from like a below average player his first year to one of the best players in college basketball when he was at Murray State. And now he's one of the best rookies in basketball. And just like as an overall leader, for a rookie to take a team that was not that good, very bad actually, to a potential playoff spot, that's incredible. Especially like since the amount of roster turnover. Obviously, he's not the only addition on the Grizzlies. There's like guys like Jaren Jackson Jr. who stepped up from his rookie year. Although at the start of the year he wasn't really too good. And then guys like Brandon Clark, who are one of the better rookies this year. I think it's just incredible to see like a guy like him like just succeed. And then you also think of individual games like against the Rockets where he was the best player on the court that game. I remember after that game you were raving about him, understandably so.
I watched that game live, and he outplayed a guy who's won MVP and been second in MVP voting 3 times. He outplayed him throughout the course of the game, and from that game you could just see like he's going to be good. He is what the Sixers hoped they got when they drafted Markelle Fultz.
Yeah, and who knows what his ceiling can be. Like you said, you threw out Derrick Rose as a potential thing. Even Derrick Rose, we never were able to see Derrick Rose's true ceiling because he got injured at such a young age. But he could definitely be a Rookie of the Year candidate depending on where he leads the Grizzlies or whatever team he is on. Most likely the Grizzlies. Like depending on like how good the Grizzlies are in a couple of years, who knows? He might be one of the best point guards of all time, or one of the best point guards in the NBA. And then it would be interesting to see how his shot develops. Obviously, he's a rookie, so in general, rookies don't really have the greatest shooting numbers, but he's still about average when it comes to 3-point field goal percentage. And when it comes to field goal percentage as a player, I think he's above average for a guard. And for a rookie, to be above average as a field goal shooter, that's insane. There's guys like R.J. Barrett who are having solid rookie seasons, and Tyler Hero. They're both having solid rookie seasons, but their field goal percentages are lower than average just because they're rookies. And that's completely understandable. But the fact that his game's already there at such a young age, he's by far the Rookie of the Year. You also touched on Zion in the Joel Embiid comparison. I think you're spot on. Like, even though he had that historic run where he was scoring like 20 points left, right, and center, he just simply hasn't played enough. I don't think Kendrick Nunn will win it, even though he's on a better team. I think, first of all, the fact that he's like significantly older than Ja and Zion, that's definitely going to play a factor. As although he was able to improve to like be a solid NBA player, like the fact that he played overseas and developed from there, it kind of like turns voters off. And then you have guys like Tyler Hero. I heard Tyler Hero say that if he never got injured, he'd win Rookie of the Year. I personally don't agree with him. I feel like he's a really good rookie. He has a lot of potential to be a good player, but it's not the same.
Yeah. One thing I will say I'm a little scared about with both Zion and Morant is with Zion, we already know about the injury potentially issues. With Morant, when you see him go up and the way he lands, it's very scary. So I'm a little worried that we're not going to have we're not going to be able to watch these two for like 15 years. I think that with just their body types and especially the way they play, they're going to be not really, they're not going to have sustained success. So enjoy them while you can.
I feel like for John Morant though, he needs obviously as a rookie. These rookies come into the league thinking they're indestructible, and he definitely had some moments like when he tried to jump over Kevin Love and Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure a coach on the Grizzlies has definitely told him to chill out with that because those things could be dangerous. Like we were talking about Klay Thompson earlier about how he got blocked, and he ended up like destroying his ACL, like, and that's just off like a block foul type thing. So who knows what's gonna happen if a guy's trying to take a charge and you try to jump over him, you miss the dunk, you land on your ankle terribly, snap your Achilles, or you get an ACL injury. Who knows? But he could last a while. Like there are guys that use athleticism that have lasted a while. Like Westbrook, he seems like a guy that's been able to play for a long amount of time. So you never know.
Cautiously optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so shall we move on to most improved player of the year award? And shall we start with your pick?
So I got Brandon Ingram because when I think about most improved, I think about like improved over all aspects, not just points per game. I feel like if you're looking at the player that Brandon Ingram was on the Lakers to the player that he is on the Pelicans, it is night and day. It's not one of those things where he got more shots, although he did get more shots. I like just his game style in general is completely different. He went from taking 1.8 threes per game to 6.3, which is a huge difference. And he went from shooting 33% to 39%. So he went from a terrible three-point shooter to like an elite three-point shooter and a very solid three-point shooter all in the course of 1 year. And he's also a better free throw shooter from 68% to 86%. So overall, like when it comes to shooting, his pure shooting ability, he's improved. When it comes to points per game, he went from 18.3 to 24.3, and he's an all-star. So he jumped about 6 points, which is an insane leap. And then also in every statistical category, he's improved in and has had career highs in. And I feel like before Zion came, he was kind of that leader on the team, and he kept the Pelicans afloat, which is definitely a huge plus to him winning Most Improved.
For me, Most Improved Player is one of the most subjective awards in the NBA. Usually it goes to the guy who was on the bench for most of last year or was in a hidden role in the previous year behind someone else, and then they go into a new situation or they start a lot of games or play a lot more minutes, and their scoring goes up, and as a result, they get the Most Improved award. But for me, the Most Improved award should go to the guy who they have a similar role to the one they did last year, similar minutes, similar team system, but they just got better as a player. And for me, the player that epitomizes that the most is Luka Doncic. This year, he's seen his points, assists, rebounds, and overall field goal percentage go up as leader of the Mavericks. However, he has the same minutes. He's only gone up 1 minute per game than last season. Also, he has the ball in his hands the same amount as he did last year. In fact, he might have it less because of the addition of Porzingis to the Mavericks roster. And he's managed to improve in these major statistical aspects, all while being in the same position he was in last year. While other guys, like you said, Ingram, he went from being behind LeBron to having free reign over his shot attempts, or guys like Bam Adebayo, who was on the bench last year and is starting now, or Devontae Graham, who hardly played last year and now is starting in frontline center. Luka has the exact same team style and exact same role he did last year, but is just a better player. So I think because of his internal improvement, I think it's because of that he should be awarded the Most Improved Player of the Year award.
Yeah, you definitely bring a great point when it comes to like from his rookie year to sophomore year, great improvement, improved in basically every category. I think he went up about 7 points per game. And and like all that. You have a lot of very valid points when it comes to that. But the reason why I don't think he should win is because he's going from a rookie year to sophomore year. And one thing that like voters, one thing that's not going to like be like too positive for voters is how he went from rookie to sophomore. Those types of jumps are somewhat expected, although not to the same magnitude as the leap he took, but more or less it's expected. I think about players like LeBron. He had a similar jump too from his rookie to sophomore year. Luka's jump was a little bit better, but LeBron had a very similar jump when it comes to points per game, assists, and rebounds. And he was sixth in most improved voting. And the player who got it, his name is Bobby Simmons. So obviously, it depends what the voters think. My argument for Ingram is, yeah, he got more shots, and he has free reign over the offense. But I feel like if you look at his game as well, Ingram went from a guy that he was kind of like, you could just put him in the AD trade, right? And like I remember having this debate with my brother on who was better, Kuzma or Ingram, or who's more valuable. And for some reason, everyone was talking about Kuzma. Kuzma is this secret piece, right? And the only reason why no one was really talking about Ingram was because of his three-point shooting. He wasn't that good of a three-point shooter. He barely took 2 shots per game, threes per game. But now he's just a better three-point shooter, and he's just a better shooter in general. I feel like that internal improvement is kind of what like gives him the step up, in my opinion, than Luka, who is a guy who like him translating from rookie to sophomore is kind of expected for him to get better because he's already had that 1 year of experience and everyone knew that he was going to be a great player to begin with.
Fair points. I think that you're right on that aspect that usually it goes to the guy who what isn't like rookie or sophomore. It's usually the guy around 4th or 5th years. Because that's when you kind of think you have an idea of what that player is, and then he just transcends that. I just think that Luka, like just in terms of internal improvement and improvement just within self, he's had the best season in terms of gotten better. But you're right to say that it's expected from a first year player to do that into his sophomore or even his 3rd season. Meanwhile, for Ingram going from his 3rd season to his 4th, it's a little less expected then. So I think you're right on that aspect.
Mm-hmm. One player that is kind of a dark horse for this award, in my opinion, I feel like he won't win it, but he definitely deserves some recognition, is Norman Powell. I feel like he went from averaging 8.6 points per game to 16.4. That's a huge leap. He's almost doubling his scoring numbers. And yeah, he's had more of an opportunity, but in years past, we were even talking about Norman Powell at the beginning of the podcast. Like he's been that guy that kind of like, never the greatest. No one expected him to be one of the main scorers on the team. And he's been able to step up and become one of the main scorers. And I think of some games like the game against the Atlanta Hawks, where he went ballistic. He scored like 36 points. And there's multiple games, like even against the Warriors, I think he scored 30 plus points, where he's like so like sneaky about it. He ends up scoring a ton of points without without you even noticing.
I think part of the reason he should get some consideration too is with a lot of the other players we've mentioned, it's like, oh, they're still under rookie contract. It's clear that Ingram has a really high ceiling. Same goes for Luka. Same goes for Pascal Siakam potentially. With Powell, he's in his 5th season. Mm-hmm. So we all kind of thought that he's hit his ceiling as a player and he doesn't have any more to improve. And he's kind of a fringe NBA player. But this season, he's proved that he can be a very efficient role player and a high tier one at that, and he can lead to success for the teams that he plays for.
Yeah, and another thing to note is that unlike Brandon Ingram or Luka, or even Devontae Graham, Norman Powell is, let's say, 3rd to 4th as a scoring option on the team. his team is a winning team. It's a contending team, like a legitimate contender. So that's also like something you have to factor. Although it's not as important in most improved, I feel like you mentioned Ban. He's also a good candidate because although he had a bigger opportunity, especially with Whiteside being gone, um, there's still improvements like when it comes to passing, becoming a better playmaker, becoming a better scorer. I feel like just because a player has a better opportunity, it doesn't translate like to that 1-to-1 ratio where more minutes equals more points. Um, and then you also mentioned Devonte Graham, who's another solid player, like from not playing at all to getting a bunch of minutes and scoring a lot. The only problem with him is he's kind of on a bad team, and someone's gonna have to take those shots. So if it wasn't Devonte Graham, it would probably be like Malik Monk or Terry Rozier, someone like that. So someone's bound to get those shots to produce more.
Speaking of Norman Powell, I think we both agree that the coach of the year is Nick Nurse. And I think that with coach of the year, it's the most annoying award in basketball, even more than most improved, because it rarely goes to the actual best coach in the league. Instead, it usually just goes to the most surprising team from that season. That's why Dwayne Casey has a coach of the year award, or Sam Mitchell or Byron Scott, who aren't great coaches, but they managed to up expectations, but they somehow won the award. With that in mind, I think despite the fact that this coach has overperformed what people expected, he is also the current best coach in the league, and that's Nick Nurse. I think last year's playoffs really say enough. Like, he should just win the award based on what he was able to do in the playoffs.
Exactly.
He took his defensive schemes against the Warriors directly led to them winning that series with the box one against Curry. His schemes against the Bucks and his making the switch of putting Kawhi on Giannis changed the whole series and led to the Raptors win. This year, he's gets the most out of every player he puts on the court. He puts them all in situations in which they can thrive. Also, I wrote here, he's like a mad scientist. I mean, he put 6'8", he's doing D'Antoni ball with 6'8" Hollis Jefferson at center at times, and it works because he knows Hollis Jefferson can go and get those boards and guard centers. And at the same time, he gets the most out of every one of his players. He gets their respect, and he gets them to play hard every single game. Like, the Raptors have one of the 5 biggest comebacks in NBA history this year against Dallas. So the fact that he can get his players, even when they're down by 30, to give in 100% effort and try to win every single game, every single night, it just means, like, the fact that he can do this with his players, it elevates him as coach of the year.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what you said is literally what I had written down. I was about to talk about the Dallas, how he single-handedly coached his way into that win. Like, I think obviously after losing Kawhi, a lot of people were skeptical of the Raptors season. I've heard some people say that they were no more than a 4th seed, and there's some people who were projecting them to not even make the playoffs. And for them to be the 2nd seed in the East over teams like Boston, Philly, like quality teams with quality players, I think it just speaks to the culture of the Raptors, the winning culture, and the defensive culture that has partially been instilled by Nick Nurse. One of my favorite quotes from Nick Nurse was when a reporter asked him about Stanley Johnson and Hollis Jefferson, about like if he thinks that they're like good fits, or I'm pretty sure it's about like a question about their defense, if their defense is a good fit, and this was in the preseason, and Nick Nurse responded with absolutely not, because at the time Hollis Jefferson wasn't really the player that he was. Like, Hollis Jefferson had to earn the minutes that he was getting, and Stanley Johnson's never cracked the rotation. Stanley Johnson doesn't play, and that's partially because he's not that good, but also because like he's not a winner, in the sense of the word winner. Like, he's never played on a good team. So I think that winning culture, I feel like his offensive systems, like especially when Casey won, not too many know that the offensive system was a system that Nick Nurse, as an assistant coach, was trying to push for
Yep.
years until they finally got swept by LeBron. Casey
Yep.
decided to try it out. They still got swept by LeBron, but they were a better regular season team. And offensively, they were top 5 in offense and defensive rating that year. Um,
That that year, Dwayne Casey won Coach of the Year for changes that Nick Nurse instilled in the Raptors, not Casey.
yeah,
Which I think it's pretty funny, honestly.
exactly.
But,
I wrote down, just as you said, he's able to utilize his players well and put them in positions to succeed. One thing that barely gets mentioned about the Raptors is how they were constantly under injury problems.
very much.
Gasol has been injured for a good amount of the year. Um, Norm was injured for a bit, a good
Yep.
portion of the year. I think Lowry was injured at the start of the year.
Yep.
There's a bunch,
Siakam,
bunch of, pardon?
Van Van Vliet's missed a lot. Siakam's missed a bit. They've
Exactly.
they've been hurt throughout the year, but Nick has said, look, if OG Anunoby gets hurt, Matt Thomas come in, hit a few threes, good to go. Siakam gets hurt, Hollis Jefferson come in, give us a few rebounds, give us some energy, cool. If that one game, like I said, where Ibaka was hurt and where Gasol was hurt, he was playing Boucher at the 5, he was playing Hollis Jefferson at the 5, guys who you wouldn't really think to put there. He gave it a try and it led to wins. So it's just incredible what he's able to do with each of the talents that the Raptors have done and just morph them into the ways that they can best fit the system in place.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when it comes to player development, I feel like I already mentioned Norm. You mentioned Siakam and also Fred. All of these guys have gone up at least 5 points per game from last year. And obviously, a big part of that is the shots that Kawhi had there, like opening up. But still, just because a player has more shots doesn't necessarily mean that it translates into scoring more. So like being able to develop them into legitimate, like really good top tier role players, and in Siakam's case, a star and potential superstar, depending on how you define superstar, of course, is another reason why you should win. And then like the defensive wise, they're second in the league in defensive rating, and they're number 1 in the league when it comes to not like points per game against. Um, they allow the least points per game out of every NBA team, which is insane to think about. The one thing that has been kind of iffy for the Raptors is the offensive rating. I think they're middle of the pack, but you can't blame them. They lost Siakam and Fred, 2 of their main scoring options for good chunks of the year, and even Norm. So the fact that they're second in the East with all those injuries, and it's kind of that next man up mentality, like you said, is insane. And then there's players like Terrence Davis, who were undrafted players that were able to develop into solid role players. And who knows what Terrence Davis is going to be next year, especially because he's athletic. He can shoot threes. Who knows?
Yeah, but I think the Raptors having Nick Nurse has led to their success as much as like having their players is. He's a coach that can turn any player into a winner and helps winning basketball. And I think that the Raptors having him gives just an advantage to other teams that have superior coaches.
Mm-hmm.